final presenter this afternoon is our own Bob Mueller. Bob is a vocal researcher of St. Genevieve history, genealogy, and trivia. He has has degrees in mechanical engineering and engineering administration from what is now the Missouri University of Science and Technology at Rolla. Bob is a past president, of course, of the Foundation for Restoration of St. Genevieve. He serves as the chairperson of the St. Genevieve County Archives Committee and the Catholic Church History Committee and our city's Tourism Advisory Committee. So once a month I have to report out to Bob and his committee. And may I add that Bob has been your program chair who put all of this together. It's the program committee, but essentially this year he was a program committee of one, and all of this is thanks to him and his efforts, like all the It takes a lot to get in touch with all of the speakers, and then to wrap it up by providing a presentation himself is just the icing on the cake, so we really appreciate that. Bob is a trustee of the State Historical Society of Missouri, and he serves on their executive committee. He's a presenter also for the St. Genevieve Speakers Bureau, so if any of you belong to organizations that are looking for speakers, please contact us, because we do have a Speakers Bureau here in St. Genevieve. And he provides guide services for groups wishing to learn about St. Genevieve. Bob has been a frequent presenter at previous St. Genevieve history conferences, and his presentation today is When the Drummers Came to St. Genevieve. Please help me welcome Bob Mueller.
We're not going to talk about drummers that drum on drums. We're going to talk about drummers that are traveling salesmen. My grandmother and grandfather were born in 1875, and I got to live with them my senior year of high school because my parents had moved to St. Genevieve from Farmington, and I wish I had a few more days to talk with them. They talked about the peddlers coming to their farm because that was the mode of merchandising in those days. Well, after around the turn of the century, with trains coming in, as Dr. Nichols talked about, and roads starting to happen, we had started to get a different kind of merchandising. We started to get traveling salesmen. Some would go door to door, some would go to businesses to sell their products. And they would typically carry along, they were called Knights of the Grip. The grip was their little salesman sample. Here's one of, so this poor guy had to sell hammers. This guy got to sell whiskey. So we're going to talk about a Drummers Association of Southeast Missouri. Well, back in those days, hotels catered to these drummers when they came to town, and they typically would have something called a sample room, where they could set up, show their wares, the public could come in, businesses could come in. And these are two advertisements out of our St. Genevieve newspapers. One in 1894 for the Southern Hotel, which is still here, and it says that the comfort of transient guests, a specialty, sample rooms for commercial men, another name for it. And then the Bradley Hotel, which was on the main square at one time, they also say they have a fine sample room for traveling men, and something most important, a first-class saloon. We find that traveling men did like saloons. It was a cold, rainy night, not in Georgia, but in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and it was raining so hard that the traveling salesmen couldn't get out and make their calls. So they were sitting around having a few libations, and one said that he had been to Rolla, Missouri about 3 months before, and the merchants there had shown him a very good time. And another guy says, I think Cape Girardeau, this guy's from Cape Girardeau, he says, I think Cape Girardeau can outdo Rolla for sure. And so they planned, they were sitting in the St. Charles Hotel there, and since gone, so they planned that they're going to have a social organization for him. And it was the beginnings of what became to be known as the Southeast Missouri Drummers Association. And they adopted a mission. And true to the farm that they were sitting around drinking and having a little fun, they said the first name was the Southeast Missouri Drummers Baseball and Drummers Association, and its nature shall be purely social. That's to bring them together and more closely unite the traveling men who come within the bounds of our territory. Our plan will be a social meeting once a year, to devote our time to pleasant and hospitable entertainment of our fellow travelers, friends, and customers. And so the first annual convention was this small group of people, and the next year, in May 16th, 1897, they met, and I think there were only 15 people there the first year. This organization lasted for 70 years, which is pretty unusual for organizations. And every year they would have an annual convention in a different town in southeast Missouri. And I started, I knew we had some in St. Genevieve, so I wondered, where were the rest of them? I found every year where they've had one, except for one. I'm missing 1 year. I think it's 1955, and I'm going to find it. I just haven't got the research done. But Cape Girardeau being the founding town, they had most of them. They had it in the first 3 years. Poplar Bluff was the most popular, second most popular town. Thanks for grinning on that, Susie. Sykeston was pretty big. I think they had 6 of them, or was it 7 of them? And actually, St. Genevieve had 6 of them over the years, and we're going to talk about those. Caruthersville, Perryville, they kind of spread it around over time. And then there was some of the smaller towns. We just had 1 or 2. Charleston had 3. Local ones around here, Farmington had it, Festus, Crystal City, also Flat River, Deloge. We don't call it Flat River anymore. They got high up at and now it's Park Hills. For those of us that grew up in the lead belt, it's still Flat River. So, and it was really kind of interesting when they come to town. They would, it was a big deal. They would make these, print these souvenir booklets beforehand, and luckily there's a number of those still in existence, and were the basis for a lot of my research. This one happens to be from Sykeston, Missouri in 1920, so it's about 24 years after they started, and these souvenir booklets were maybe 40, 50 pages, and they're about this big. They would show a town history, they'd show pictures of elected officials, a lot of biographies of local people. So as a genealogist, I love seeing this thing because you would see birthdays in there and histories of merchandising establishments. And why I really wanted to talk about this, because the first one was in 1908 in St. Genevieve, and I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures from St. Genevieve from 100 years ago. Then they would also show all the members of their association, and the back part of it was advertising the company. Most of these companies were out of St. Louis because that was the merchandising center. In 1906, they even adopted a uniform, the famous white drummer's uniform, and they had a badge that they developed, and they adopted colors of red and green, and when the drummers came to town, the town would be decorated in red and green. I even saw where they painted the smokestacks of a steamboat red and green once for a convention. But you see, they would get together, and they would also have a lot of parades and athletic events. The very first one in 1897, they did have a baseball game between the drummers and the local merchants. But parades were another big deal. And this is the Sykeston parade in 1920. You can see they had elephants and all kinds of things there. They would sometimes they'd have automobiles in the parade. Always bands, either local bands, kids bands. It was just a big deal. I mentioned bands, and I found which bands played here in St. Genevieve at the 6 different ones. They would always have dances for the public, balls for the traveling men and their wives. Back then, as Frank talked about, some of the things, they would still have vaudeville and minstrel shows that kind of looked down on African Americans at times, but that was that time of the thing. But probably the biggest band that played year after year was called the, I can't remember what his first name was. It was the Peckins American Band. And you can see it was pretty big, and they'd come into town on a train. When they had these conventions, they would do special trains to come to the town. They'd get special cut rate deals, and it was a big thing. So, kind of now talking about St. Genevieve, the first one was in 1908, and then we had one 10 years later, 1918. Then just right before the Depression, then they typically had these conventions in May or June, or the 1st of June, mostly the end of May. So in May 1929, right before the Depression, we're having this drummers convention here. And then as Brian talked about, 1935 was a big year, and it wasn't just the American Legion that had conventions here. It's kind of unbelievable how many different conventions, KC Convention, the drummers, the Southeast Missouri Press Association. It was just, and they would bring 5,000 or 500 to 2,000 people in here. I don't know where they put them. I guess it was all in private homes, but it was a big deal. And then it was about 18 years later, in 53, that they had one. The last one was 1963. And I want to start back with the 1908, because that was how I kind of got introduced to it with the booklet that we had of the 1908. And I can't see this happening today, but the mayor puts out this proclamation that Thursday and Friday are declared half holidays, and all the stores were supposed to shut down except for the barber shops. And probably saloons, but he didn't mention that. Banks were supposed to be closed down. They typically came in on a Thursday afternoon for registration. Friday was all the fun stuff, and then Saturday morning they would have a final breakfast and a business meeting and depart. And the mayor declared cleaning day in St. Genevieve. I think there's sometimes I'd like to see the mayor do that again. This is one of the advertisements out of one of the papers here. We're blessed that we have 2 newspapers on microfilm. One goes back to 1873, the other went back to 1882. And a lot of this stuff came out of the Herald. But they were going to have a parade a mile long. Talk about advertising. It was going to have 6 bands, 400 drummers, and the highest population of drummers signed up was about 500 just a few years before that. 55 National Guard members, 100 flower floats, 100 business floats, elephants, camels, giraffes, hippos, alligators, and tortoises. Now, we did have one almost this big. The convention came in, Thursday, they came in and they had a reception, and then that afternoon they had a Mardi Gras parade where everybody dressed up in town, a mass carnival. I think that was outdoors. Then they had the Jefferson Barracks Depot Band came down. A guy named Frank J. Weber was the conductor. And then they had Fred Bill. He was a high wire act, and they strung a rope or something up by the courthouse over a building, and he would do tricks and stuff on this high rope over at the courthouse. And that evening they had a mass ball. Next day they'd get up in the morning. I'm sure there was a little drinking going on that night. The band, the St. Gen band would play, and then the high wire act, I don't think he did as much drinking. And then they had this big drummers parade where they're all dressed in white. They had school kids, they had these bands going around town. It really wasn't a mile long. I'll show you an article later on. Then they had their traditional baseball game, a vaudeville, a minstrel show, and then a dance later that night at the Armory. And Saturday was the business meeting. Now these dances went on, I think Reveille was at 1 p.m. No, Taps was at 1 p.m. Reveille was at 6 a.m. These guys were professional travelers. But now I'm going to start showing you a series of pictures that came out of this 1908 magazine. This was the thing of our city officials of the time. We had a mayor, we had 3 councilmen, or 6 councilmen, because we only had 3 wards at the time, an attorney, 1 city marshal, and a city clerk, a city collector, and a police officer. We now have, 11 officers or something like that. We've changed a little bit. But what's nice is we have pictures of all of these people from 1908. This way. Now, we talked about, this was pretty much a men's organization, but as you heard earlier, sometimes you needed the women to really make the thing work well. And there was an auxiliary of women organized maybe about 3 years before the visit to St. Genevieve. Now these happen to be pictures of ladies from St. Genevieve. Mrs. Mrs. P. Weiler and Mrs. A.J. Siebert, her husband ran a saloon. Mrs. George Rutledge, her husband was a doctor, and I would particularly like her hat. This is Miss Minnie Vey, and she is the Al Kaiser of the previous generation. Al is a musician here in town and plays the organ at church and gives piano lessons. Well, Minnie Vey was a pianist, and I think she taught down at SEMO. She opened up schools for music here, and she wrote the song St. Genevieve for the 1935 bicentennial. We actually have, I think, 3 songs about St. Genevieve. We have one from the bicentennial, then Bill Simon wrote one, and Susie from the East Street Band wrote one about the 93 flood. So a little bit of St. Genevieve trivia. They would also cover the history of the town in these brochures. And so they're great documents as you go around to find out the history of Kennett or Charleston or Poplar Bluff. And they showed the old stone church, and they went all the way back to the old town. They mentioned Fort Chart in here, Kaskaskia, different things, the Native Americans who were here, how did they dress? And that's where a lot of those were the legends of our time. And we've talked about the blue and the green handkerchiefs on the head, and some of that stuff comes out in here. They talk about the first church and the settlers and first newspaper, which happened, I think, in about 1821. And then he mentioned just a small paragraph on what St. Genevieve was like. Yeah. The other thing that came out of here is they would have biographies and pictures of prominent citizens, which is, again, for a genealogist, a wonderful thing. This happens to be the Oberle family, -1. It was in the next down, but the Oberles created this Oberle sausage that we all had at the reception. They came into town in the 1870s. And these are some of the original sons. You can see that family was quite large. And so again, it's a great thing for historians to look back at these magazines. Now I want to take you through, the reason I brought this up is they had a lot of pictures of St. Genevieve from 1908. So this is looking down Merchant Street from 2nd Street. This is the Felix Valley house, and Billy Bader's house on the left, and my house, the Bogey house, is in there. And way down at the end of the street, you can see, just barely see the Western Lime Works. And I'll show you another picture of that. But you can see they had just put in lighting not too long before that. The city actually ran, by this time the city was running the light and water operations. This is looking down Market Street. This is the Lutheran Church. And this thing with the cupola is the old public school. That was where the First State Bank old building is. On the left was a harness shop, and eventually became the Fleur-de-Lis grade school, or kindergarten. And Tom Grimger, a friend of mine here, remembers going to the Fleur-de-Lis. You can see the porch was built right into the street. A lot of our deeds here in town actually end up partway into the street because they were very narrow. The French did not make square blocks. We don't have a square block in the historic district. So we got really strange land records here. This is looking 3rd Street towards the north. You can see this is the Bovary store. This is where the Valley has their band building now. It was a major department store. This is where the Anvil is. On the left, you see the old jail, and behind it, the courthouse. This is Main Street, looking to the north. The building on the left is the Hotel St. Genevieve, and on the right is the Henry J. Roser house that was torn down in 1960. It was a beautiful, beautiful house in federal style. It had several L's added onto it over the years. When you look at the sandbar maps for that house, they even had a pigeon coop in the back. So, what's interesting, this is the local residents. The building next to the hotel is, we call it Lottie Cleaners. There, it's a 3-story building. Now it's a 2-story building. They tore it down sometime after 1930 to 2 stories. This is what our courthouse looked like in 1908. It was built around 1880. It was you remember here this morning that the old brick house was the courthouse. Well, about 1814 or 15, I think they built a Victorian style looking courthouse, and then there was some political shenanigans in the 1880s. They said they were going to repair the old one, well, it fell down or something, and they built a new one, and that was the new one. And this is the second public school in St. Genevieve. It was, again, where the first bank building is. The first school is over on Washington, and it closed down in about 1873 and became the first African-American school here in St. Genevieve. I kind of got interested in this when I started looking at it. These are houses you've seen previously today, except for one. On the left is what the Bolduc House looked like in 1908. It was gabled. Had a fence in the front. Just a little further down was a stone fence that mysteriously disappeared one night in some kind of dispute.
What's that huge thing on the corner?
Which corner?
I guess it's a chimney?
Yeah, that would be the outdoor kitchen chimney. Not the outdoor, the corner kitchen on the porch. This house is what you saw as the Le Malheur house earlier when Steve was giving his presentation. Back in those days, it was a two-story house with a brick building, which by that time was a blacksmith shop. Before that, it was the Dutchmendy Hotel. That was the first school for girls. It was founded by the Sisters of Loretto in 1838. You saw the Guibord house, and when Brian was talking about that, it doesn't look much different in 1908. And we have an 1880s picture, and it doesn't look much different. But by the time the Valleys bought it, it was really dilapidated, and Jules and Marie really did bring that back. This is it was called the William Wilder House. It's really the Vital Saint Jean Beauvais house. It's the third house of the Poteau-en-Terre style that we have here in St. Genevieve. One of my great aunts owned that. But there was a pear tree out in front, and the brochure mentioned the old pear tree. Misspelled that, not tree, the tree. But what is interesting to me was we started looking at the dates that they listed for these houses. 1785 for Bolduc, Guibord 1785, Old Convent 1790. People didn't really know when things were built. Houses are the most difficult things to date. Land's easy. Houses are difficult. It wasn't until we got dendrochronology and the work done by Professor Guy out at the University of Missouri that we started really being able to date our houses. And like the town being started in 1735, in the early days of advertising, we kind of took a few liberties with the dates of our houses. People would look at the dates on deeds and say, well, they bought the land, surely they built the house. Well, it didn't happen. They had pictures of the churches. This is, and tomorrow we'll do a tour of this church. Our Bricklin, the little stone building to the left, was built as a seminary in 1873, but they couldn't get the Christian Brothers to come, so the priest took it as its rectory. This was the grade school at the time. It was located on what we call the Valley Desert. And that was the convent next to it, that great house. And this is what the church looked like in 1908 before it was expanded. That church was built in 1880. And it's a great view. It answered a few questions. We always thought the church ended at this one arch, but this picture concludes that it really had a bigger sanctuary than what we thought. Other churches we see on the left are really the oldest church in town, the Lutheran Church. It started in 1769. It was pretty dilapidated back then. It looks a lot better now. And then the Presbyterian Church was first started in 1904. They did an addition in the 1950s. But most people don't know that we had a Methodist church here in town, and it was up, for those of you who know where Pumpkin Bosler used to have his funeral home, there was a parking lot across the street on the corner of, I guess that's Jefferson and 6th. That's where the Methodist church was, and it lasted until 1935 when it was tore down. This is the Bovary store. Many of us complain that St. Genevieve's changed and you really can't even buy clothes in St. Genevieve anymore. You got to go to some other town. Well, I've got pictures of the inside of this Bovary store. And it's amazing how much cloth, how much canned goods and furniture and stuff that they sold there in 1908. This building is still existing. It's located down on Merchant Street. It's called the Eagle Bakery Building. It's where the stained glass shop was in recently. That building was completed in opened the first part of May 1908, and this convention was the last part of May 1908. So that building's less than a month old in this picture. And You can see on the left there, they've already torn down the Ferdinand Rozier house in 1908, and the house next to it is the Emil Bott house, where Treasured Memories currently is today. This is one of my favorite places. I think this is the second or third brewery in St. Genevieve. This one's still existing. Started about 1894. It was called the St. Genevieve Brewing and Lighting Company. You got lit 2 ways. It's just a neat place, and they provided power for their compressors and stuff like that. The building in 1906 in July burnt. They saved 2 things, some machinery and all the beer in the basement. And they had it rebuilt by December of that year. We sometimes in catastrophes, we know what's important. This was the Rozier Cash Store. The Rozier was a business partner of John James Audubon. They eventually opened up a big store down in St. Mary. They were involved with the Joker store down on Main Street, but then they moved to this place, and it was called the Rozier Cash Store. I guess, I don't know if they took stuff on credit there or not. That's where the showroom shop is right now. Oops.
So Bob, Rozier and Audubon joint venture was where the Show Me Shop is now?
No, we don't know exactly where his shop was, and we probably think it's more up on Merchant Street. Ferdinand Rozier's house is where Steiger House downtown was, and it got torn down in 1908. But Audubon was only here about 6 weeks, but then came back several other times. This is Bader's Saloon. That's what we call the Anvil. A guy named Joseph Bate started the Anvil stuff, and actually I found 3 of them. He started in New Offenburg, he ended up on the corner of 4th and Market, and then eventually moved down to this location on the courthouse. I haven't went in to check to see if it's the same bar.
That was my question.
Yeah, I have to apologize, I haven't done that yet. Now this was an interesting picture. This is Dr. Lanning's drugstore down on Main Street. And it's now 109 North Main. It's where the Art Guild has their, Doc Cabins has her stuff. And I showed Doc Cabins this picture, so she had Bill Niagara pull it up. And what's interesting, this poster is for the 1908 Drummers magazine. So it dates the picture. Yeah. I mean, I was blown away when I saw that. This is another drugstore. This is Rutledge's drugstore. It later moved down the street. This is where the St. Genevieve County Abstract is currently right now. I finally figured out by that brickwork in the top where it's at. We have contests in town. Somebody will show a picture of some part of a building, and you got to find where it's at. It's a lot of fun. A couple of buildings that are still existing, the Rozier Bank building on the corner of 2nd and Merchant. That is not the bank that Jesse James robbed. That was down on the corner of Main and Merchant, and it was torn down in 1936. The old brick house has had a storied past. Augusta DeMunn died in there. It's been a school, a courthouse. It's got a still in the basement still. Very interesting place. It used to be called the first brick building built west of the Mississippi, and the brick came here by ballast on a French ship. I think they've done some analysis of the brick, and it came from within 20 miles from here. But stories are good. I mean, that's how you sell stuff. Oops. Many of you are familiar with, as you go downtown, and you see that the church is redoing what we call the old Rozier building on the corner of 3rd and Merchant. On that location, there used to be a place called the Union Hall, and it burnt about 1906. And then Jokerston Yealy built this edifice on that corner. Kind of magnificent. They had these angled entrances, and inside, we have some pictures out of the magazine of things that they were selling. You can see their furniture department there. Here's their clothing department. A little more than we have now. And I think that was their dry goods department. Well, in 1922, that building burned, and they built the present building that's currently under restoration. This is called the Myers Hotel. We now call it the Main Street Inn. It was built in the 1880s. Next to it is something called the Cone Mill, and there was a big explosion in about 1886, and a lady's husband got killed in that, and with the money she got from it, she built this building. A guy named William Baumstart then marries her. They own the building next door, which I think we call it the LeCompte House now, but it had the front porches on it. It doesn't have that now, so that was an annex. What amazed me is it had this big garden out back where they would have, their guests could stroll, and they would have beer gardens there. I think we had parks all over St. Genevieve: Sycamore Park, Herzog Park, Baumstart's Park, Sucre's Park, Rosier's Park. Trying to find out where all these parks are is another area of research. This is one of my favorite ones. It's the Hotel St. Genevieve, a city hotel. This was built in 1903. So we have a picture of it in 1908, and it included a sample room, large, commodious, well lighted. Any lighting's good can be shown to advantage. I'm part of a group that's currently restoring this building. We're going to take it back to what it looked like in 1903. The only difference is we won't have this ugly detail on the top that came off in the 1961 fire. And it's going to be painted instead of brick, but we're putting the porch back on, and we're putting the mercantile windows are already in, so it's a nice little go back. This implement shop is where the Welcome Center is now, and like I said, owned it later in life, but you can see back in 1908 they're still selling a lot of wagons. I think our first car came through here about 1909. The first dealership was 1912. At one time, our Ford dealership was the 27th oldest Ford dealership in the United States. And we still have a Ford dealership, so it goes pretty far back. Oops. Limestone is probably the biggest industry we've had over the last 120 years. We've had a number of different lime industries. We have the world's largest cement plant in the north end of the county now. Mississippi Lime's been here over 100 years. But down by the railroad tracks, by the railroad stations, we used to have the Western Lime Works. And Roger Caputo showed me exactly where they were at. Mississippi Lime bought them and then tore down. You can actually see the trains going by the plant. And this is another kind of interesting, it's not as clear as I'd like, but we had a brickyard. We actually had two in town, but this is out at the end of 3rd Street where Dunsey Construction is. Kind of looking back down towards the Hinch House on the left, and kind of looking towards the downtown area. And it's a little clearer in the magazine, and you can see parts of the brewery in there too. And this is our famous railroad transfer ferry that started in 1904 and ended in 1961, but they would actually run rail cars onto a barge, take it across the river, and then unload them on the other side, because there was no crossing between Eads Bridge in St. Louis and the bridge down at Thebes, south of Cape. And this was our ferry back in 1908, called it the Whit Ferry, and a little bit bigger, it looks like, than what we had. We've had ferries here since I've seen ferry licenses in the 1810, 1812 St. Louis Gazette for St. Genevieve. Down in St. Mary, Missouri, they actually had a ferry that was powered by mules on a round table. And this is the Valley Springs that Brian talked about. You can't see this anymore, but this is kind of the area where they dammed it up for the 1935 bicentennial. Couple of houses. These are all still existing, by the way. I found them. Most of them on the north end of town. We saw John Walt, the implement dealer. Somebody mentioned John Swint. He did the first bottled beer in St. Genevieve. He had a bottling company here, and his house is still here. P.H. Schroeder was the brewmaster at the brewery at the time. That's right on the corner of 3rd and Leahy. And Francis Hookhouse is just down the street on Leahy, almost on Main Street. And we found that was the last headquarters for the Grand Army of the Republic in St. Genevieve, or Civil War, stuff like that. Anybody know which house this is? Which one?
Yours?
No. This is the Inn St. John Beauvais. It's Felix Roger's house. And it was just, Felix was a brother to Henry, so they owned that whole city block. And they had two magnificent houses there. The Felix Roger one is the only one that had left. Oh, this is the Henry Roger house that I mentioned. He was a good-looking, stern businessman. So somebody said that and I found later on, both newspapers started doing a looking back kind of routine. And so in I think it was in 1953, they were talking about the 53 convention, and they said, back then, although it was not called a financial success, it was a good social success. A lot of times, and you saw it in the bicentennial, they really hyped this thing. You know, they were supposed to have 20, 25,000 people a day at the bicentennial, didn't have it. Same thing happened here. The hotels stocked up with things like oysters and frog legs and lobsters. The saloons had champagne, and they found out traveling salesmen like beer and cheap steaks. So the hotels didn't do very good. The parade that was the mile-long parade, it turned out to be 4 blocks long. But everyone had a grand time, and so the businesses did well because the farmers came in to see the parade. So we still kind of do that at Christmas time, don't we? So that was 1908. To me, it's a treasure to have these documents because we not only can see certain buildings, we can see what's behind buildings and what it was like back then. In 1918, they came again. We have a copy of that magazine. They used basically the same pictures. They didn't take any pictures for that one, so that wasn't. But they put out this big welcome. Mr. Mayor Weiler, he said, the drummers are coming. We welcome them into our gates. He's throwing away the key to the city. They can just run wild in our city. And this was their schedule. It was, for 1918, a pretty good schedule. This was, the war was going on, so they did a Red Cross benefit on the dance this year. Automobiles were one of the ways they got here that time. They had, again, a musical carnival. Noel Pepin's band was back in. And that was 1 a.m. was taps and 6 a.m. reveille. They had their normal baseball game. They also did their white suit parade. And then they had the minstrels, Henry Roos minstrels from Vestas came down for that game. It was a big night. And they awarded all kinds of prizes. But when you read down through that list, there's a lot of cigars. There's a lot of whiskey. And some little girl, they always had the kids in the parade, she got a fine doll for the little girl's grand prize and a goat wagon and harness for the boys' grand prize. Things have changed. And this was the entertainment of those were the minstrels, the St. Genevieve band, and the Noel Pepin band that came for that. Then 1929 is another one. Here are the businesses, and again, this is right before the Depression. We had a couple businesses move into town then. They're decorating inside and out with their red and green bunting, and so they wanted to make it very pretty for the things. And by this time, we're called Welcome to the Convention City. It amazes me when I look back at the convention St. Genevieve had. And I mean, these would be 2,000 people, or they bring a train or a boat down from St. Louis. Where they put these people up? But they did it time and time again. Here's the schedule from 1929. They kind of still have bands. They did a vaudeville show. The Armory was down on Washington and Front Street, just by the Inn St. John Beauvais. Here they had the school children's parade, another baseball game. They had some things this time, I never could figure out what it was. They had a kangaroo court, I guess that's for their members, and then they had the What Club banquet at midnight. By the way, they were up at 6 a.m. the next morning, or they were supposed to be. Then we get to the 1935 convention, which had happened just before the one Brian talked about. They added a couple little things here. They had trap shooting, they had a pet parade. It was something that I think that comes up. Again, a comedy crew. ladies did bridge games at the hospital building. Here we're talking about 1935. We had a hospital here in 1918. Actually, it's where the St. Genevieve Winery was our first hospital building, and there was a second one down, I think, on St. Mary Road. Some of the highlights of the vaudeville show, they had an accordion sextet. You don't see many of those anymore. Indian baritone, Hawaiian singers and dancers. What I like are the Jenkins sisters. They did songs and dances, acrobats and contortionists, and acrobatic tap dance. Now these girls were talented. The bands that played that year were the Knights of Columbus band. We used to have the St. Genevieve band, and Mike Pollard and his dance band. I've just discovered that, so I got to find out who Mike Pollard and his dance band were. And Seymour's band from St. Louis. The pet parade. They had dogs, goats, cats, groundhogs, prairie birds, and I can't spell, 2 small twin brothers in full military dress and armed papai. That means from head to foot. I had to look that one up. The other thing they had in the 1935 was a babies convention. People would bring their babies, and they had these doctors and nurses judge to see if they were healthy, which ones were the healthiest. And good old Rosetta and Rosella Breminger were deemed to be the healthiest babies, nearest normal in physical. I gotta find out. I'm sure I got that in my genealogy, because I gotta find out kids. Then 1953, instead of a 3-day convention, we're down to a 2-day convention. They had a parade beginning at the Catholic Church. The kids had to decorate their bicycles. The kids got prizes for decoration. And they had their open house at the Hotel Audubon, which was the Hotel St. Genevieve. In 1946, it became the Hotel Audubon until 1961. And here they started they're doing a little tour of historic St. Genevieve. We're starting to get that tourism part. The VFW Hall had just been built 2 years before, so they had a big barbecue up there and a dance. And old Dunsy's band, and so he had a big dance band. It was like a big band era kind of stuff, and so he played for that one. The last convention here was in 1963. They went back to a 3-day one. They had a joint dinner with the Chamber of Commerce and the merchants. Just a tour, no parade in 1963. The Muni Band played. By that time, we'd switched. The Muni Band was in operation, and it played up at the Catholic schoolyard. Next morning, they had breakfast and didn't have a business meeting and left town. The Paraplay noted that many of the drummers had retired. They had a nice time in St. Genevieve and enjoyed their stay here. A little bit earlier, it said the drummers had almost 500 members, and that was about 1904. But in the past 20 years, the change in merchandising, good roads to the cities, and other factors have reduced their membership to a fraction of its former place. So roads, on one hand, provided a lot of things, but it also changed a lot of businesses. No longer did we have that horse and carriage business on the corner. The last convention was in 1965, fittingly in Cape Girardeau at the Marquette Hotel, which is still there. Only about 40 drummers attended. And the next year, the president finally said, we called a meeting of the executives and kind of said, it's just not doing it. Let's cut it off. Sent a letter to the remaining 15 members asking them to attend the meeting. Only 2 officers showed up. That was the end of that. Like many organizations, we couldn't get enough members anymore. The young fellows just weren't very interested. I mean, many of us in the historic organizations and stuff recognize that fact. And the final act was February 1969. They donated their last $89.51 to the Shriners Hospital. A lot of times they would have little excerpts in their things, and I call this the best advice for a drummer. They asked this one guy who was very successful at door-to-door sales. And they asked him what his secret of success was, and he said, every time I go up and knock on the door and the lady comes and answers the door, I always say, is your mother at home? So that's the end of my presentation. I did want to close with a few comments for the district conference. Just a reminder, the Beauvais Amarillo House, another one of our 3 Coteau houses, will be open for you tonight from 5 to 6. They've got a great architectural display in there. They've got a diorama of St. Genevieve as it existed in 1832. They've also got some new stuff on Pelagie, who was a free woman of color who owned that house, and there's a young man from San Francisco who's been doing a lot of research on her, and he's a descendant of her. So please take advantage of that. You don't get to go into all the post and ground houses because there's not many of them, and they're not always open. I'd also like to remind you tomorrow at 11 o'clock at the cemetery, Memorial Cemetery, which is at 5th and Merchant. We'll do a tour of the cemetery, followed by a tour of the church. It's not going to rain, but if it should be raining, we will just do the church at 12 o'clock. It'll be fun. We can tell you a little bit about some of the goofy things that have happened in our cemetery and some of its history and some of the efforts that we've been doing to preserve it. And the Catholic Church has got some interesting stuff too. We should be done by 12:30, 1 o'clock with those 2 tours. As Sandra said, we've got some great things coming up, World Heritage Days and Deja Vu Spirit Reunion October 25th. December 6th and 7th is our Christmas, holiday Christmas festival. If it doesn't snow. December 7th, we have also the reenactment of the Les Réveillons, the traditional meal that the French had after midnight mass. December 31st is the reenactment of La Guillemette, another 250-year-old tradition. And February 7th, rather than on Epiphany, we have King's Ball, or in leap years, a Queen's Ball. But it's a great time to come enjoy some good old-time music, dance, eat, drink, and have fun. But before we leave, I'd like to thank Hank Johnson for last night, not only for opening the house, but I think we all got to sample some really good wines last night, so thanks to that. Donna Roush of Helix Valley wasn't with us, but she let us park there, and she's letting us go into the Beauvais Amarillo tonight. I'd like to thank Sandra Cabot for her work today, and Shirley Myers, Al Kaiser for their culinary help on samples or hors d'oeuvres last night. Thanks to Jack Ketting and Mickey Ketting and Al Kaiser, helped setting up all those chairs and stuff and taking them down last night. We were actually done by 7:30. It was a great crew. I'd like to thank my wife Linda. She's probably hiding in the kitchen. She put up with for this and then trying to do a presentation, prepare a presentation in the middle of it. And for those of you that do presentation, it takes a lot of time. But she did arrange the lunch and the breakfast and everything. By the way, take some donuts with you. So I'd like to also thank Becky Millinger and Bonnie Sanderson. Bonnie, we're glad you made it here. And I think let's give a round of applause for our speakers today. So have safe journeys home. We hope to see you at some later events tonight and tomorrow. But let's have another good one next year. And as Sandra said, if you got ideas for presentations, bring them forward. We're always looking for things. Today we went way back in the colonial period and just before statehood, and we went all the way forward to the 60s. So I think that's what's wonderful about St. Genevieve. We have a rich breadth of history. It's just waiting to be explored. So thank you. Channel 7 and 98 TV and web broadcasting are made possible through contributions and donations from viewers like you. Thank you for your support.